Hanbit, and I'm a pastry chef from Korea. Hi everybody, it's Hanbit. 안녕하세요, 조한빛입니다. In this video, I'm going to show you how to make the perfect tart shell. I know I have a previous upload on how to make a perfect tart shell, and many of you have watched it, but I wanted to upload another video that is more comprehensive than the one I uploaded before. And specifically, I wanted to cover the two different types of tart rings, or tart pans we call it. In the previous video, I showed you how to make a perfect tart shell using a perforated tart ring, which is this. But in this video, I'm also going to show you how to make a tart shell using a regular tart pan. And I guess this is much more approachable and far more used for home baking. I think I missed that out last time, so I decided to cover it this time around. Making a good tart shell is everything to making a good tart, because a tart shell is essentially a basket where you put everything inside. By the way, from my experience, when I started out baking, making a tart shell wasn't really a walk in the park. I found it rather difficult. So I want to guide you the way in making a perfect tart shell. I'm going to talk a bit about tart rings or tart pans. Here I have a perforated tart ring and a tart pan. You're probably used to using or seeing a tart pan like this. The difference between the two is not just about how you call it. I know this is called a ring and this is called a pan, but more so I want to focus on the fact that this tart ring is perforate. It means it has holes, whereas this doesn't. And this not only means that they look different after you bake it, but the technique of lining the tart shell is different for the two. I personally prefer using the perforated tart ring because that's what a lot of professional pastry chefs use, and it just looks a bit more professional. But I know that in most cases, especially with home baking, you'll be much more accustomed to using the tart pan. It's definitely more accessible, and the wrinkles really give you that kind of a homey feel, which I like. So I don't think it's a matter of which one's better than the other, but more so of which one you're familiar with and you are comfortable working with, because that's where you're going to get the best results. Just a quick discussion on the word tart shell. There are many different words that are used around this word tart shell, which might be very, very confusing, and I sometimes get confused as well. So for example, you might have heard of the word tart crust, sweet tart crust, pie crust, short crust pastry, and some French words like pâte sucrée, pâte sablée, and pâte brisée, and so on. There are many different vocabs and it gets so confusing. But the way I categorize it is by looking at it as tart crust and pie crust. The difference between the two is that the recipe for the tart crust always contains sugar, whereas with pie crust, it's usually savory, but it can contain a bit of sugar. Also, pie crust tends to be much more flaky than the tart crust. And I hope this categorization kind of straightens out the confusion, because I always used to get so baffled with this. Before I go over the ingredients, I'm going to talk you through the method that I'm going to use today. There are a couple of different methods that you can use when making a tart crust. First is the creaming method, which is the method that I'm going to use today. All your ingredients need to be at room temperature, especially your butter and eggs. And you start by beating the butter lightly and creaming it with the powdered sugar and so on. The other method is the sablage method, where all your ingredients need to be cold. The whole idea of the sablage method is that you surround the butter with the dry ingredients by rubbing it in. The two different methods will result in tart crust with slightly different textures, but to be honest, when you fill it in completely with fillings, you won't be able to notice a massive difference between the two. And today, I'm going to use the cream method, which I personally find it easier to work with. Room temperature butter, powdered sugar. You usually don't use granulated sugar for tart crust. You want a smooth texture, so you usually use powdered sugar. Almond powder, which gives a slight nutty flavor, it just makes it taste better. Cornstarch, room temperature eggs, and cake flour. And remember, I'm using the same recipe and the same dough for both the tart ring and the tart pan. It's just that the technique for lining the two is different. First, I'm going to start by lightly beating the butter. By the way, throughout the whole process, I'm going to lightly beat and lightly mix. I don't want to incorporate much air into the batter because that's going to make it overexpand in the oven when it's baked. I'm going to sift in my powdered sugar, almond powder, and cornstarch all at the same time. Super quick. So powdered sugar, almond powder, and cornstarch. just scraping the sides of the bowl before I added my eggs. I'm going to gradually add my eggs. And finally, my cake flour. This is as far as I will go with my hand mixer because I'm going to take it out and blend it smooth on the silicone mat. And that's a process called fraiser. The whole point of this fraiser process is to mix everything together homogeneously by hand. Because using hand mixer or a stand mixer, so basically using a machine, won't result in a completely homogeneous dough. The traditional method is to use the heel of your hand or your palm. So you would take the dough and smooth it out with the heel of your hand like this. However, this method would result in your dough becoming warm very quickly, so I prefer using a scraper. Just smooth it out against the silicone mat, and this will result in a very smooth and a homogeneous dough. Have you clicked like and subscribe? So a couple of parchment papers. I know that some people use dusting flour, but trust me, if you use parchment paper, your work will become so much neater. And because you're not adding dusting flour to your existing dough, the quality of your dough will be consistent throughout the rolling process, and any excess bits that's left over, you can reuse it. I'm going to roll it out to 3mm thickness because I'm going to use a 16cm diameter tart ring. And these are leveling bars of 3mm thickness. You have to use a leveling bar. It's impossible to roll it out to an even thickness without these bars. Great, so I've got a tart crust dough of 3mm thickness, and I'm going to leave this to rest in the fridge for an hour. In the meanwhile, while the tart dough is in the fridge, I'm going to prepare my tart ring. With tart pans, you need to prepare parchment paper to put inside so that you can place the pie weights above that. What you want is you want to start with some sort of a square parchment paper. And then it's just a matter of folding it over and over again. It's going to resemble a shape of a circle when I unfold it. And I'm going to cut some slits so that it can fit the wrinkles on the side. So when I fold this, it's going to be magic. Oh, that's just perfect. Great. Right, now I'm going to get my dough out of the fridge. The whole point of these perforated tart rings is that you have these small holes that allow hot air to be dispersed evenly throughout the tart. And therefore, you don't need pie weights to push the tart either down or to the side of the tart ring. Well, in this case, we have these holes on the side, but you need the holes at the bottom as well. Therefore, I've used a perforated mat, or you can call it a mesh. The way you line the inside of a perforated tart ring is you need a disc and you need a strip. And what do you do with the dough that's left over? You reuse it. I've just chilled this in the freezer for a few minutes because it was just getting too soft. It's really hot inside here. Right, it's a bit too cold and it will snap, so I'm just going to rub it with my hand. I'm going to press it down and glue it with the warmth of my finger. There you go. It's glued nicely. Now the other side, I'm going to cut the excess. Make sure it's tight. And again, glue it with the warmth of your finger. And now what do? I cut the excess off with my knife. Move out turn it around, cut it out. Now that looks very, very neat. If your dough is soft, then put it in the fridge or the freezer for about 10 to 20 minutes. And when it's really hard and cold, then put it straight in the oven and bake it. The way to work the tart pan is to cut out a very large disc and then line that in. So I'm just going to cut it out. Now lining the tart pan. Here's the dough that I've taken out of the freezer. If I try and line the tart pan with the dough right now, the dough is going to snap because it's frozen. I'm going to warm it up with my hands, and I want it to be flexible and flexible just enough to be able to line the tart pan. It's becoming flexible. It's like a pizza dough. Don't do this. If you drop it, you have to make it again. Okay, so that should be enough. Place it at the center. And it's literally just folding it in so that it just fits the inside. And now I'm going to trim the excess, and there are a couple of ways of doing it. You can either use a knife and cut it out like this, or get a rolling pin and roll it out. This is definitely faster. The dough is a bit too soft at the moment, so I'm going to put it in the freezer, harden it, and then I'm going to take it out, fork the bottom, and add pie weights. Right, so I've left it in the freezer for about 20-30 minutes. It's nice and hard. I'm going to fork the bottom. And here's my parchment paper that I folded before. The size is perfect. And now, pie weights. Perfect. It's now ready to go in the oven. So here's my finished tart shells. This is the tart shell using the tart pan, and this is a tart shell using the perforated tart ring. They both look great. As soon as they came out of the oven, I left it on a cooling rack and let them cool down completely at room temperature. Well, let's take a look. So there is my tart shell using the tart pan. This is the regular tart pan. And this is the tart shell using the perforated tart ring. Some people have been asking me about egg wash that you apply on the tart. Egg wash is a mixture of egg yolk and heavy cream. You brush it on top of the tart shell and bake it. And what it does is it provides a protective layer so that the tart stays crisp for longer. I have had many questions about what to do if you live in a hot country. Well, it's in the middle of summer today in Seoul, and it was 36 degrees outside, and I still worked around it. So I turned the AC on max, which resulted in a working temperature of around 28 degrees Celsius, which is still quite warm. So I utilized my fridge and my freezer. When I felt my dough was getting warm, I put it in the fridge or the freezer, left it for a bit, and then I took it out, worked a bit, put it back in. You just have to work around the weather, and you just have to work quickly. Hopefully this tutorial on how to make the perfect tart shell was helpful. I believe it was very comprehensive, covering both the perforated tart ring and the regular tart pan. Making a good tart shell is essential to making a delicious tart. So next time you make a tart, please watch my video and you'll be able to make a perfect tart shell. I'll come back next time with another Pastry 101 video. Thank you very much. 감사합니다. I don't know if you know yet, I've realized that I'm dying to tell you.